Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev Meeting, February 20th.
Hey everyone, great news. We managed to release Flux 2.5 like 10 minutes ago. It was a long ride here, but yeah, I am very happy this is done. It's the first release for this year. It's jam-packed with new features. Uh, And I want to personally thank Dipti for implementing GitHub app authentication and Mateus for implementing the custom health checks with Cell. And we have Kevin, which implemented, is not in this meeting, but Kevin implemented self filtering for notification controller. So yeah, this release was major milestone. We managed to integrate cell expressions in the Flux APIs, and yeah, I'm really happy with what we achieved using cell so far, and we'll see where we can use it better in the future. Dipti, can we discuss future plans around? So my my request to you is if you can work on finalizing the GitHub app implementation. We still need it in notification controller. Notification controller can either write commit status back to GitHub. So you have a green check or a red check, and this is highly used by Flux users. But we also have GitHub dispatch integration. And dispatch is also something very nice where you can basically have this promotion pipeline where Flux from staging calls GitHub dispatch, hey, the test has passed in staging, and it triggers a GitHub workflow. They can promote that version to production and so on. And for organizations to finally get rid of personal access tokens, we really need this feature in notification controller. Could you prioritize that for the following months?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I can work on that. Yeah, I will review the code a little more. I've been checking that a little bit, and it should be yeah, doable. I will do a little more code review and keep that in my list for the next release. Yeah. That plus I had like one more in the notification controller category itself. I'd created a issue for it a couple of days ago. So whenever we have like if there is time, I
Yes.
can put it in the agenda and we can discuss that as well.
Yeah, let's discuss it now. So I think it's related, right? We
Yeah.
want people to move away from personal access tokens
Yeah.
for both GitHub and Azure. And now source controller and image automation controller, they can be used completely without personal access tokens. But we still have notification controller for GitHub and for Azure as well, right? And Azure, I've seen you created the issue for
Yeah, I created for Azure Event
event.
Hub. Yeah, but I saw that there's one more issue for Azure DevOps as well. And so there'll be these three. So GitHub App Auth for GitHub and GitHub Dispatch, and similarly for Azure Event Hub
Exactly,
and
yeah.
Azure DevOps for the same two like the Git commit status and for like notifications. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's find the issue for DevOps.
Yeah, DevOps also, I think I can paste it here.
Okay, so let's see if I can assign you. I can assign you because you are now an org member. Okay, so I have assigned to you the DevOps provider support.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, have you looked into this around the Azure APIs? Is there a difference between DevOps and Event Hub? I'm guessing it is, right? DevOps
Yes,
is
so
special.
Yeah, so Azure DevOps and Azure Event Hub have different APIs. So Azure DevOps is like the repository, right? So it has a Azure DevOps Go API. So I was seeing what it would take to kind of add the support for managed identity. But the problem is that the Azure DevOps Go API that doesn't support a managed identity connection today. It only supports a PAT connection. So I think we would have to kind of use REST APIs to use like that, not use the Azure DevOps Go API SDK, but use the REST
Oh,
APIs to
damn.
kind of make that request. I saw some issues in their repository. The Azure DevOps Go API repository doesn't look like it's like frequently contributed to or anything. There were a few people who tried to enhance it, but I don't think their PRs received like much traction. So we would have to, if we have to add support for this, it would have to be like we can get the token, etc., using the package code that we added, but to send it to the DevOps API, we'll have to use the REST
Damn.
calls.
Okay. So the authentication for doing Git operations is supported, but you don't have authentication for the actual API of the service.
Hmm.
There are two APIs basically. It's the
Yeah,
Git interface and is the okay. Okay.
yeah.
So let's not add this to our planning for the next release. Let's
Hmm.
aim for GitHub, which I think it will be the most straightforward based on your code
Yeah,
in source control and image automation. So
yeah,
if you could do that first, I think it should be fairly easy. You just
yeah.
call the same package you
Right.
created, you get the token, and you pass the token to the current code, right?
Yep.
The major difference uh, between what you did in source controller and image automation controller, here we will not have for GitHub a special uh, type or provider or anything in the API because we
Mhm.
already have
Have it.
GitHub
Yeah.
dispatcher, GitHub.
Hmm.
So how we can do it is by looking at the secret and
Hmm.
test for the
The app ID.
ID,
Mhm.
app ID. If it has app ID, then we have a switch. Is app ID, if it's username and password, then we stick with the current implementation, which is token. And
Yep.
that should work. And we always have to be authenticated when we write back to GitHub. So it's not like we don't have a third case where, I don't know, it's a public repo or whatever. That was the case with source controller, but here we write data back to the repository, so we always have to be authenticated.
Mm.
Okay, so GitHub first, then the Event Hub. I know we had like a very old SDK in there, which is deprecated.
Hmm.
I didn't
Yeah.
have time to look into it, but I know there is a new one, and
Yeah.
I looked a little bit. I saw your issue a couple of days ago, and I looked a little bit into the new SDK, and it feels like that's fully supported. Like
Hmm.
we don't need to call or do
Yeah.
any kind of hacks.
Yeah. Hmm.
We have to flip the SDK, and then we can use the same workload identity
Yep.
implementation
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
in package,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, so for Azure Event Hub, everything is supported. So I think currently there are two mechanisms that we have, the JWT and the SAS connection string. So to continue to support the JWT approach, we would kind of mock the token provider so that if they did provide a JWT for any existing deployments, that would continue to work. And the other two are also supported by the SDK, the SAS connection string or a managed identity. So for managed identity, the setup would be similar where we have the controller set up with like the workload identity, annotations and labels. And then it would just pick up the, use the default Azure credential and pass that to the Azure Event Hub APIs. So that should
So
be
we
straightforward.
can, okay, so we can fully drop the old
Older
SDK,
SDK.
right?
Yeah,
We
yeah.
can move
Just,
to the
yeah,
new
move, migrate
SDK
completely to the new SDK. Yeah,
and not break the old providers.
right.
Now, I wasn't quite aware that the one second, let me read again what you said here because it's quite interesting. So you are saying the token expires very fast, right?
1 hour, yeah. And then someone has to like manually run a command, get the token, update
So
the
who
secret.
does that? I
I
mean,
don't know.
what's
I don't think it's very usable today. Yeah, I think either they should have a
You could,
job or something
people
which
could,
does that.
yeah,
Yeah,
people could have like a cron job
job.
or
Yeah, cron
something.
job. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still a little painful if it was integrated, then yeah, they would not have to.
so provider is not GA. So we still have the chance to remove and deprecate things from our APIs here.
Mhm.
So I would say, let's do this. In the next Flux release, we have workload identity in there, and we also support the two other options, the highly insecure one and the one that someone has to run a cron job, which is, right?
Yeah.
Then we, Deepti, you write a blog post on the Fluxity website
Mhm.
after the next release, how to migrate your event hub, whatever, and we explain to people, hey, we now have starting with Flux 2.5, 2.5 it will be. Now we have workload identity. There are zero reasons why you would use this old authentication
Yeah.
mechanism. We tell people in that blog post, like, this is how we can migrate, right? Like
Mhm.
you have in the docs, you create the managed identity, you do that. And so in 2.6, we add workload identity. We deprecate the two other authentication mechanisms, but we don't remove them. They are still going to work in 2.6. And then we give people by the end of the year or something like that, and then we remove them because I feel like I don't want to get alerting GA with a highly insecure option and some option that's because now we have like the best option out there, like no passwords, workload identity is great,
Mhm.
right? There is no reason anyone should stay on SaaS or tokens. Actually, if I remember correctly, the SaaS, am I saying it correctly? SaaS,
Yeah, the SaaS
DAS, right?
connection string. Yeah.
This came from your team, this request with the SaaS, like 2 years ago,
SaaS
3 years
connection
ago.
string. Okay, it's considered like really insecure, so I don't think it should not even be used in production. So I would be very surprised if anybody used it in production, maybe for like POCs and things because it's easy to use. But I think org-wide there are restrictions that we should not use SaaS tokens, and even the JWT that requires like a client secret to query the token, and client secrets are also now complete no-no in like most organizations. So it's all managed identity or service principles.
Okay, so
So I
from a
think both of
security
those are not
perspective,
acceptable. Yeah, yeah.
okay,
So
so we
for
can, yeah.
if somebody's using a bare metal cluster with Azure things, how would they authenticate?
So they have a bare metal cluster, so not AKS cluster.
Um, just bare metal anywhere
Mhm.
using Azure services.
Yeah, so they could onboard to Azure Arc, which would then
Mm.
kind of project that resource or like any cluster anywhere, even an AWS or a GCP or any cluster into Azure, and then they could continue to use workload identity, just like they do on an AKS cluster.
I'm just
Oh,
asking because like I think most things we provide both a way to authenticate through secrets and also workload identity. So if there was a safe way to use a secret, maybe it would make sense for those people, but I don't know.
Are you talking from like keeping the SaaS connection string method around, like adding it
Not
around?
not specifically, not specifically. If that's so insecure, probably not. But
Mm.
like for example, in the Google PubSub provider, we can use both workload identity through the controller workload identity or JSON service account key for Google. So, and that can be used like in a bare metal cluster, for example, that doesn't have Antos, the Google thing that I believe is similar to what you said for Azure, right?
Arc. Hmm.
So like,
So
yeah,
wait a second, what is the equivalent for Azure? The equivalent to the service account that Google does? It's not the SaaS stuff, it's the JWT.
Yeah, I think it is the JWT, but that requires like there are like other ways to configure the JWT token other than a client secret. Like you can have a certificate,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes, yeah,
That's quite more similar to the Google JSON Service
Okay.
Account key.
okay.
They don't expire, and they also have a certificate in this
Certificate,
JSON key. So that's probably more equivalent, yeah.
yeah. So they would still need that cron job for like notification controller, but use instead of a secret, use the certificate, get the token, and then use the token via the JWT mechanism. If it was
Or we
a
could also implement the way where we have the certificate and the
thing set
actual
up for
equivalent.
notification control.
Yeah, yeah.
We could, but I would
Yeah,
think,
no.
yeah, workload
No,
identities
so
probably.
my proposal is like this. We implement workload identity. We announce we are deprecating these two other ways. And we give people time to complain. If there are Flux users which are also Azure customers and they depend on one of those two, they should come forward, open an issue, reach out to Azure support, whatever, and say the reason why they can't use workload identity. Because maybe there aren't any customers out there, and we are going to keep all this old code in there, unsecure, sticking around on some security audit. That could represent an issue for us. So I'm not for keeping things in there, especially because we are not GA and we
Yeah.
have the luxury of still deprecating stuff.
I think the
So,
blog post is a great idea. I'd be happy to help with that.
cool. Yeah, so we write the blog post, we advertise it as much as possible. Hopefully, if Azure users will scream, someone will scream, oh, they are removing SaaS and I can't use workload identity. And then we talk to them and figure out why they can't use it. And if they have like a plausible reason, a good reason, we can decide afterwards how to deal with it. But I will not anticipate we have not everybody will be happy with workload identity. Yeah, I hope they will. So
Yeah, I think that's the direction everybody is going in. So I would be very surprised if workload
Yeah,
identity
yeah.
doesn't meet their needs. Yeah.
yeah, and especially if Arc enables workload identity on your own data centers,
Mhm.
then that issue is kind of solved, right? So
Yeah.
it's not only AKS, what we are building here is also for
Anything RP.
anywhere where Arc is enabled, right?
Right.
Now another question was around ACR access and also access to Azure DevOps. Like we currently now have implemented a way where you assign Azure identity through workload to the source controller pod or image automation. Let's say source controller because that one has also ACR, works a lot with ACR. Now, what I've heard from several people is that they have multi-tenant clusters, AKS, where they say, we assign a namespace with Flux multi-tenancy and so on to some team, and that team has some dedicated ACR repositories and maybe Azure DevOps repositories. But let's talk about ACR because it's similar. Let's say they have embraced Flux OCI artifacts. They don't want to use Git in production. And they have AKS ACR. Now, one AKS cluster is partitioned by namespace, right? And you have several teams, each encapsulated in its namespace, and you can do this really well with Flux and Kubernetes RBAC. Now, the problem is that if they don't want to have these they want to have workload identity for ACR and not deal with any secrets. One tenant, if it knows the exact URL of another tenant ACR repository, they can create a Flux OCI repo with that URL. I don't know how they figure it out, but let's say they do. And then they can pull the whatever manifests that other team has there. Now there are here two security implications. Like people are saying, oh, what if we keep secrets in the OCI artifact? If you keep secrets in the OCI artifact, they should be encrypted with SOPs and decrypted by Flux. So even if you look at the manifest, you'll not be able to see any secrets because you don't have that private key. So that's one thing. Another thing is we don't want to use SOPs with Edge encryption. We want to use SOPs with Azure Vault because we are Azure customers. So we don't want to deal with static secrets and so on. And with Azure Vault, for Azure Vault, you should also authenticate with workload identity, right? From customized controller. Now the problem is because customized controller is its identity is assigned to everything, it will have access to all the vaults of all tenants. So if you can get an encrypted secret by figuring out the URL from ACR and you pull from the other tenant, you can put that secret in your namespace. And what customized controller will do will decrypt it because it has access to all the vault instances.
Mhm.
Right? So what is the right way to basically use workload identity, but not for a workload, like impersonating a service account? Like how Flux multi-tenancy works is you have a namespace, and in that namespace, you need a service account, let's say called Flux. Every time you commit something to Git, when Flux applies that stuff, it applies it by impersonating that service account in your namespace, which is subject to RBAC that locks you down in that namespace. And that's Kubernetes world, it works great. That's bulletproof. Now the problem is with workload identity, you would have to use the workload identity of the controller to impersonate a service account which is linked to another workload identity that represents that tenant.
Mm-hmm.
So that tenant could only access their Vault instance, their ACR instance, and not even if they figure out the URL of another ACR repo, if their service account does not have a binding to an Azure identity, which grants it access to that ACR instance, it shouldn't be able to pull it, right? So this is something I know for you to discuss with your team, with people that have implemented workload identity, how in Azure, how we can build this stuff in Flux where we kind of,
Multi-tenancy is needed.
Yeah, basically,
yeah,
we need an endpoint from Azure where we can send a service account token, which is OIDC, and get back some access token for Azure. That's all we can do with Kubernetes. We need something like that, basically. That's what Google does.
but this is already, doesn't matter what Google has, this is already implemented in the Azure workload identity controller, right? Every cloud provider implements its own controller and has its own procedure.
Yes. Yeah, so I think the service account and federated credential is supposed to make you achieve that, right? So the federated credential is associated with the service account. But here the problem is that the service account is associated with like the notification controller or source controller or something
Yeah,
like
so
that.
that's
But
the
we
thing.
want it to be associated with the
With the
object.
object, yeah.
Yeah.
So in the object, we have service account name. And then with that, we create a token in the Kubernetes API for that service account. And then we exchange that token for a token for the cloud. That's basically it.
As long as the controller, I think it depends on the context that the controller is running in. So that I know that if there is a service account, because when we create the federated credential, we give the service account a name. So the service account token that can be exchanged for sure, but how to kind of load it in the controller's context, because I think I don't know if there are any restrictions that it is only able to work with the service account that the controller uses. That versus any object, that I think I need to check a little more about how that
Yeah,
works.
exactly.
Right.
So how Kubernetes works, how we run customized controller under the customized controller service account, but when we apply stuff, we don't apply it
Won't
as
as
customized
that.
controller service account. We apply it as the tenant service account, which is a different namespace. How we do that, Kubernetes has an impersonation verb and API. So, and we grant the customized controller service account the right to impersonate. That's it. Then we use the controller identity and we send a request to Kubernetes API with the name of the service account from the tenant. We say, this is my identity. I want now to impersonate this other identity. Kubernetes checks RBAC. Are you allowed to impersonate other identity? Yes. Okay. Here is the token for the new identity, and then we act as that identity inside the namespace or whatever.
In this case, the RBAC permission that we will grant to the controller service account is the permission to create tokens for service accounts. So the API that we will use from the Kubernetes API is the API to create a token for a service account in the cluster. That will give you back a JWT from the service account issuer, and that JWT OIDC token is what we want to exchange for whatever in the cloud, like an access token from the cloud. Then we get that access token from the cloud, and then we use it for whatever we want. So that's what we're gonna do in this case.
So what we have now for Azure, right? We rely on the workload identity controller daemon set, whatever it is. That controller does the
Handshake.
is the service account token, give me the JWT. Then we have we just get the JWT and we say, oh, I'm connecting to Azure DevOps, I'm connecting to whatever, And
we need to do what that controller does.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can find out who in Azure built that controller, and if they can give you some hints how we can achieve this without rewriting everything. Like maybe they have some kind of Go library. I'm guessing it's a Go controller. They didn't write it in Java.
You mean
or
the
whatever.
like the webhook that's there, right? That's the controller you're referring to, right? Just want to clarify, like the one that kind of does the volume project, like the token projection. It takes the service account and done the project.
Right, because so there is something there made by Azure, which all of a sudden it will pop in your pod a token on a symlink, and it updates the token frequently. And because it's the symlink, every time we use the workload identity library, the library reads the symlink, which is the latest token, and everything works, right? And we use that token to exchange and get that ephemeral token that expires, and we do our work. Now, we can't just do that. We also need to do the same thing as that webhook controller. I don't know what really is. Maybe it's
what
just
I said,
a daemon set on the node. Whatever.
It's what I said. We're gonna create a token for the service account on the object in the Kubernetes API, instead of mounting it like the controller does it. Like if there's a webhook, mutating webhook or whatever, we can't do that, right? We will just like create the token ourselves and exchange it. So it's pretty likely that it's pretty likely that the libraries have this logic and know this endpoint where you can do the exchange. So pretty much what we need to use.
But is it really just a webhook? I mean, isn't that identity which is mounted in the pod ephemeral?
It is ephemeral, but it's like a normal Kubernetes service account token that the kubelet rotates, and it has
Oh,
an
so it's the
audience.
kubelet that rotates.
Yeah, so and
Okay.
it has an audience. Like you can
Mhm.
specify an audience, right? And this audience is the Azure issuer.
Azure, mhm.
Yep,
The OIDC issuer is the audience, and it kind of.
exactly. So really, we just need to find out what the libraries, the Azure libraries, use for the exchange, what the endpoint is, and even probably there's some library. I believe there's some library that we can just call to do that. So we give as input to this library the service account DWT that we just created in the Kubernetes API, and this library will give us back the temporary access
Yeah,
token.
yeah, exactly. That will be ideal. Like we don't want
Yeah,
to implement everything that's
yeah,
in kubelet because you're
yeah,
right.
yeah,
It's actually kubelet that mounts the file with the symlink. It's not just the webhook
yeah.
because
And the
kubelet
file
rotates
is
it,
a
right?
Kubernetes token, Kubernetes service
Yeah,
account token. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
yeah. It's
so
exactly the same thing as Google. Exactly the same thing.
yeah, and hopefully as AWS because we
Yeah,
need this feature
for
across all the
exchange.
3 clouds that we support, right? We don't want this only for Azure or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to, but having Dipti here, we can start with Azure and see
Yeah, honestly,
if
to me,
that can
like
be the first.
Azure was the most question mark in my head, to be honest. Like because I have already done all of this for Google and investigated a bit for AWS, but Azure was like the most different one because it's the only one that has the mutating webhook that adds the projected token, the projected volume for the token. So it's a bit different, but at the end, it's probably exactly the same thing. So yeah, really good to have you here, Diti.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at some point this year we should aim to, I don't, maybe not implement it, but have a good plan of is this possible? How is this possible?
Yeah. I would like
Write
to
an
start an RFC.
RFC.
Yeah, I would like to start that RFC. Yeah.
Yeah, because so this RFC should build on the RFC that Dipti created, right? Like, okay, we now have workload identity, works great, but it's not multi-tenant.
Mm.
Only those that do hard multi-tenancy and then assign a whole cluster to a team, for them is perfectly fine what we have today. But the reality is people find it hard to create many clusters. Maybe it's also the cloud vendor's fault. Creating a cluster takes a lot of time. It's a ton of Terraform that you have to write or whatever. Getting access to it is hard. So there are many, and also there is a cost of the control plane, right? If you have 100 clusters, it costs, I don't know, $100 or whatever per month, just the control plane, or $70, something like that. It's a cost, right? So I've seen many Flux users going with this type of approach. For dev and staging, we don't want to spend that much money, so we have one cluster with many tenants in there per namespace. And in production, some of them are more conscious about risks and so on, and only there they have this cluster per tenant. But there are also many Flux users, which also in production, they rely on Kubernetes multi-tenancy, namespaces are fine, RBAC is fine, but when you get to cloud vendor services, then you kind of, you risk, especially with Key Vault. I would not recommend anyone to use Key Vault when the cluster is shared, because it's just how do you are protecting yourself? You are hoping no one will guess the ACR URL. That's not security. Like, I get that those IDs are unique or whatever, but maybe someone finds it out somehow, right? And then they can decrypt everything. So it's really a big problem that I hope we can solve without bringing too much into Flux by using libraries created by the cloud vendors and have that implemented at some point. So the end goal will be you'll have a service account name on your Git repository, and that will allow you to connect to Azure DevOps that belongs to a particular tenant, a service account on the OCI repository that will limit your scope to only the ECR where you are really allowed to go, and a service account name on the Flux customization that will grant you access only to the key vault of your tenant, right? So only when we have all of that, and of course, Azure Event Hub, and only the provider in that namespace can connect to that Event Hub instance. And then we can actually say, yes, it's safe to share the same AKS or Arc cluster with many tenants. Especially, I don't know, I think you've seen that deeply with Arc and on-prem. Especially if you have bare metals, these machines are huge, right?
Yeah.
So you'll have like huge clusters, one cluster for, right? And everybody's using namespaces and so on because you don't want to buy many small hardware. Like no one does that. Like they have these huge metal clusters, and especially for those on-prem, I think it's that are using Arc with workload identity. I think for them it will be way more important because they are the ones that always share the same cluster to have this kind of feature at some point.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest challenge in terms of security when you explain multi-tenancy to Kubernetes users, because everybody expects like, oh, I'm assigning a service account. That should be fine. Well, not really. It is as long as you stay within Kubernetes boundaries and you don't go, outside of it. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to resume. I'm going to add the Azure Event Hub to the 2.6 roadmap.
Yeah.
We have GitHub in there. We are not going to add Azure DevOps. That remains to be investigated or whatever. I don't think commit status is that has a huge user base for Azure DevOps, but who knows? We'll see how many people will request it. And yeah, if you can start with GitHub, that will be great.
Sounds good.
Any other topics today? If not, we can end up early and continue with Flux release.
I thought you said it was finished. I don't have anything else.
So we finished the release of Flux to end the CLI, but we still have the Terraform provider that comes after. Ping someone to do the Helm chart stuff. Me and Mateus, we need to release Flux Enterprise, Flux Operator. So the controller releases are just the first step. Deepti has to go and release the Azure DevOps.
Yeah, that takes way longer because it's like an entire stack change all the way from the top to bottom. Yeah, we're still working through the previous release. Yeah. The story just gets started after the Flux release, right?
Yeah, we've built so much automation to make Flux Enterprise be fast, and kind of take us like 24 hours to release it, but it was like huge amount of work to automate all of that. It's crazy. Yes,
Out of curiosity, is there going to be an update to Flagger as well?
We
New
released
release?
Flagger in December, I think.
Oh, okay.
There are some things in Flagger that still need reviews and merges. So probably in March we'll do a Flagger release. There are some big features in there that I talked to the other Flagger maintainer with Sanskar about those. We have a good plan, what we want to do for the next release, but not all things are quite there. We have an external contributor that wants to add Knative support to Flagger. So Flagger right now can route traffic and do all the magic with Kubernetes native objects, deployment and daemon set.
Mm.
But even if Knative creates pods and so on, it's not a deployment, it's a Knative object, and Knative has its own routing mechanism and so on. And a lot of people wanted for years now to be able to do progressive delivery for functions. Knative is a function as a service. And a bunch of people tried to implement it, but now we actually have someone that contributed a newer proposal in Flagger for having Knative support, which looks really good. From how much code it touches very little code. That's my main concern, right? When you have like a project that integrates with everything and it's there for years, I'm very afraid of big changes that are like, oh, let's rewrite half of it because I want to fit in my new use case, right? Because then you probably will destroy many other integrations, right, in that process. So I'm always afraid of like huge pull requests with 10K lines of code changes and stuff like that. Those are terrifying. But the latest pull request open for Knative, it actually fits well into how Flagger does all the things, and it just integrates with those interfaces that we've created without touching anything else. So I think now it's in a good position to have Knative support because I'm not afraid of it anymore. It doesn't change half of Flagger source code. Yeah.
And,
On the
are
opposite,
those changes being discussed in this group, or is there a separate group for Flagger?
we discussed them I think on Slack mostly. We
Oh.
don't have a public meeting with Flagger. But if someone wants to discuss Flagger in the Flux meeting, we can definitely do a special edition of the meeting. We did those last year, so we can definitely do it. But yeah, most discussions are right now on GitHub in pull requests. Like,
Now, the reason I'm
and so-
asking is, as I already mentioned, I'm doing some freelancing, and I may have a Flagger opportunity coming down the pike where I will be chartered to install Flagger for a company in Berlin.
Cool. Yeah, if you have any questions with that, can join this meeting and ask them. There is
Okay.
no problem. Flagger is a Flux sub-project, so this meeting can definitely also discuss Flagger things.
Mm.
Okay, I think we are all done. Was nice seeing you, Dipti. Finally.
Same here, same here. It's been a while.
Thank you all for your hard work on the release.
Thank you. Yeah, it's finally out, so I'm really happy. Something to discuss at KubeCon. Bragging rights at KubeCon. We have a new release. Yeah. Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day.
All right.
Bye.
Take care,
Have a good day.
everyone.
Bye.
See you next time.